Hi, I'm Ardelia. I brought a homemade pie to Thanksgiving and left with a packed suitcase I didn't pack myself. My parents said they didn't expect me to stay. My sister said she was protecting me when she rerouted mail, signed my name, and moved into the house my grandfather left to me. But what hurt more wasn't the house. It was hearing my grandpa ask right in front of everyone, "Did you like the lake house I gave you?" And realizing they all froze because they knew I never got it. How long had they been planning to cut me out without ever saying it aloud? I pulled into the driveway, the crunch of gravel beneath my tires the only sound greeting me. The house looked exactly as I remembered it. Chipped paint on the porch railings, a rust-colored wreath still clinging to the door from last year's Thanksgiving. I sat in the car for a beat, holding the pie dish I'd baked the night before. It wasn't store-bought, though no one would have blamed me if it had been. It was pumpkin, just like Grandma used to make, a recipe passed down that no one else in this family seemed to care for anymore. Inside, laughter spilled out through the front windows. I could already picture the scene, wine glasses clinking, my sister Callista perched like a magazine cover on the armrest of the couch, her voice always the loudest. I braced myself. As I opened the door, the warm smell of rosemary, turkey, and cinnamon swept through me. For a second, it almost felt like home, until I realized not one person turned to greet me. Not even a casual, "Hey, you made it." I walked in slowly, balancing the pie dish carefully. Everyone was already gathered in the living room, glasses full, plates of appetizers scattered around. My mother, Merla, sat cross-legged on the recliner, laughing politely at something Dad had said. Callista's polished laugh echoed through the room as she leaned in toward her husband. I cleared my throat. "Hey, happy Thanksgiving." Callista glanced up briefly. "Oh, Ardelia, you're here." She said it like she was surprised. "Of course I'm here. It's Thanksgiving," I replied, setting the pie on the kitchen counter. That's when I noticed it. The dining table was set, meticulously, polished silverware, name cards in gold ink, 6 spots, 6 names. Mine wasn't among them. I tried to hide my confusion, scanning each place setting again just in case. "Hey, Mom, was there a mix-up with the name cards? I don't see mine." Merla looked up from her wine. "Oh," she said lightly, "we didn't think you'd stay long. I thought you mentioned you had something early tomorrow." "No, I didn't." She gave a small shrug, as if it didn't matter either way. I bit my lip and stepped back toward the hallway, toward the kitchen. Maybe they forgot. Maybe it wasn't personal. I walked in and offered to help with dinner prep. "Need a hand with anything? I can stir gravy or finish setting the side dishes." Callista waved a dismissive hand. "Better not. You always mess with the flow, remember?" She laughed like it was a long-running joke. Apparently, the joke was me. I walked down the hall to the guest bedroom, my old room, and paused at the door. It was changed. The quilt I'd sewn the summer before college was folded neatly at the foot of the bed. A basket of towels sat on the chair. My photos, my books, gone. In their place were travel magazines and scented candles. A box with my name in Sharpie sat beside the closet. I didn't open it. I already knew what was inside. Voices drifted from the hallway. I recognized Callista's tone, low and conspiratorial. "She really needs to move on with her life already," she whispered to someone. I didn't see who. "You can't mooch off family forever." I stood there, my hand on the doorknob, pulse pounding in my ears. When did I become the family embarrassment? I stepped out for air. The wind had picked up, dry and sharp. I walked the perimeter of the porch, letting the cold bite at my cheeks. I could hear my heart thudding, trying to push the shame back down where it wouldn't show. When I returned inside, something was different. By the front door sat my suitcase. Not just any suitcase, mine. Navy blue, with the broken zipper I'd meant to replace last summer, packed, neatly zipped. It hadn't been there when I arrived. I stared at it. Merla passed by me casually, a towel over her shoulder. "I figured you might want to avoid traffic later," she said. That's when it clicked. The suitcase hadn't moved on its own. Someone had packed it. Someone had set it there. On purpose. Just like they did after high school, when I took a year off before college. I'd come home from a part-time job one evening and found my bedroom emptied, turned into Dad's new office without so much as a heads up. And now, they didn't even pretend. I walked to the dining area. People were starting to gather, fixing their collars, pouring another glass. Callista took the head seat without hesitation. She tapped her glass with her spoon and announced dinner would be served shortly. Merla gestured for everyone to take their places. Everyone did, except me. There was no chair left for me. I stood holding my dessert. For a second, I felt like a child again, waiting to be told where I belonged. Dad, seeing me hover, said stiffly, "Maybe you can just sit at the kitchen counter?" I didn't move. I didn't respond. I set the pie down gently on the table, careful not to chip the dish. I stood there a moment longer, no one looking up, no one noticing there wasn't a place for me. Something's not right, I thought. Something much deeper than a missing seat. I stepped outside again, but this time not to breathe, to think. My hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the numb kind of anger that starts deep and works its way to your throat. It was a clear evening, sky already dimming, the last golden light brushing the tops of the pine trees. I stood still on the porch, pretending to check my phone, anything to delay going back in. But eventually, I did. I opened the door, the warmth hitting me like a wall. Not comforting, more like suffocating. The air inside wasn't cozy anymore. It was dense with smiles too wide and words too sharp to hear plainly. Callista saw me first. Her mouth stretched into that glossy practice smile she always wore when there were guests around or a camera nearby. "You're still here?" she said loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Thought you had an early shift tomorrow or something." My father, Harlan, didn't look up from his recliner. "Don't worry," he muttered. "Your suitcase is ready." No one laughed. No one needed to. The meaning landed just fine. I didn't respond. Not out loud, but inside, something in me cracked. Not broken, just shifted. I caught my mother's glance for a brief moment as she passed by with a tray of wine glasses. She looked away just as quickly, her face blank and tired, like a woman rehearsing not seeing something, even when it stood right in front of her. I made my way toward the hallway, not toward my old room. I knew what I'd find there, but toward the kitchen instead. Maybe I could keep busy. Maybe if I chopped carrots or poured drinks, I'd earn a reason to stay. "Need help with anything?" I asked, hoping the question sounded natural. Callista looked up from garnishing her cranberry salad. "Better not," she said. "You always mess with the flow, remember?" No smile this time, just cool efficiency. I nodded once. "I didn't say what I wanted to say, like when I covered your rent in college, or paid for your breaks when you didn't want Dad to know you blew through another set." Instead, I stepped back toward the hallway again, drifting like a ghost past cousins, aunts, and one uncle I barely knew, who was already deep into his third glass of Cabernet. From the hall, I heard Callista's voice, not loud, but loud enough. She's always been the dependent one. Mom and Dad were just too nice to kick her out earlier. At least now, she'll finally grow up. She said it with the kind of casual cruelty that hits harder than shouting ever could. And the cousin she whispered to just nodded, didn't push back, didn't disagree, as if they'd all had the same conversation before. Only this time, I just happened to be in earshot. A dozen little moments flooded back to me. The time I brought dinner after Merla's surgery and was met with surprise, not gratitude. The Christmas Callista got a framed portrait of the whole family, minus me. And now I understood. It wasn't that they'd forgotten. It was that I'd been written out on purpose. Dinner was being served. I could hear the clatter of utensils, the scrape of chairs. I walked slowly into the dining room, eyes scanning for a chair, a plate, anything. There was none. The table was full, 6 seats, all taken. My pie sat untouched at the far end of the buffet. Callista glanced at it with mild irritation. "We already have enough dessert, but thank you," she said, loud and sweet. I stood still, one hand brushing against the edge of a cabinet. "May I have a plate?" I asked. Merla didn't miss a beat. "We didn't think you'd still be here, honey. You always say Thanksgiving makes you anxious." I didn't argue. What was the point? Instead, I walked into the kitchen, opened the cabinet, and took out a paper plate. I scooped some mashed potatoes, a spoonful of green bean casserole, skipped the turkey. I sat at the counter, my back to the dining room. No one noticed, or pretended not to. As I ate, I listened. The laughter behind me swelled and receded like waves. Callista was holding court as usual, telling stories of her recent client, something about a corporate rebrand and a trip to Portland. The table echoed with approval, with familiarity. But not for me. I looked down at my plate, not because I was sad, but because I was thinking. Funny how they decided what I felt, what I said, what I deserved. I hadn't been part of this family in a long time. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. Callista stood up, raised her wine glass. "I just want to say," she began, pausing dramatically like a politician on camera, "to family that shows up when it matters." The room erupted in clinks and hums of approval. I didn't lift my head. I didn't touch my glass. Instead, I whispered to myself, just loud enough for no one to hear, "This time, I'll make sure I'm the one they remember." This wasn't the first time I felt invisible, but it would be the last. I leaned back against the cold frame of the garage door, fingers gripping the edges of my coat pocket. My mind wasn't in the present anymore. It had drifted back 2 years, to another Thanksgiving, to another moment that seemed small then, but now felt like it had been echoing in slow motion ever since. That year, I'd pulled into this same driveway with a busted water pump in my car. I'd taken on extra tutoring hours to cover rent, but the unexpected repair had wiped me out. I didn't want a handout. I just needed help to keep going. So, after dinner, I asked Callista and Mom if they could spot me just enough to keep the car running so I could drive to the after-school program across town. Callista had laughed, not like a chuckle, not even mean, really, more like I'd said something adorably naive. "Maybe," she said, tapping her wine glass, "you should finally get a real job instead of playing teacher for pennies." The room had gone quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't fall out of shock, but from agreement. Mom just sighed and offered me leftover pie. Dad started talking about football stats like I hadn't said anything at all. I remember standing outside after that, pretending I needed fresh air, when really I needed to not cry where they could see me. I told myself it was nothing, that family's joke, that I was being sensitive. But the truth is, that was the first time I stopped believing I belonged here. I just hadn't let myself admit it until now. Back in the garage, I pulled open one of the bins stacked against the far wall. It was labeled, Misk, Fall. These used to be my storage boxes. After I moved out, they were folded into the general household overflow, holiday decorations, random keepsakes no one had sorted. I rifled through plastic leaves, a few broken ornaments, a tangle of string lights, until I found it. A card. Sealed. Crisp envelope. My name in Grandpa's handwriting. I froze. I turned it over and saw a note scratched across the front in rushed cursive. Opened by mistake. But it hadn't been opened. The seal was intact. I slid my nail beneath the flap and peeled it open. Inside was a birthday card. From months ago. To my favorite reader, it said, "The lake house is yours now. May it bring you peace like your presence brings me." There was a check tucked inside, undeposited, folded cleanly, never even creased. They knew. They hid it. They decided I didn't deserve it. I sat down on an old beach chair, that card trembling in my hands. I wasn't angry in that moment. I was shattered. This wasn't about a house. It wasn't about money. It was about being erased. They didn't just forget me. They rewrote me out of the story. It wasn't the first time either. That summer, I'd asked to spend a weekend at the lake house, just a break to write, to breathe. Callista had said she already had it booked for a family gathering, and that it'd be better if I came some other time. That other time never came. I remembered sending a thank you card to Grandpa when I heard he'd gifted the house, after I was told it went to someone else in the family who needed it more. I never heard back. Now I knew why. They intercepted the mail. Maybe they even sent replies in my name. Maybe they just told him I never responded. Every act of gratitude I'd tried to send never reached him. It made sense now, his voice on the phone, a little more distant each time, asking carefully, "Are you okay out there?" As if I were the one who disappeared. But I hadn't disappeared. They just kept turning the lights off behind me until I couldn't find my way back. I folded the card and slipped it into my jacket. The chill of the envelope pressed against my chest like it belonged there. Back in the house, I passed through the hallway without saying a word. Mom saw me first, then Callista. Neither spoke. They looked at me the way people look at strangers they think they might recognize, uncertain if they should wave or pretend they didn't see. I didn't stop. I didn't slow. I didn't need an apology anymore. They erased my name from the family's mouth. Now I'll make sure it's the only name left they remember. The birthday card was still in my lap, soft and bent at the corners from where I'd been holding it too tightly. I sat alone in the garage, the door cracked open enough to let in the night air. I didn't want company, but I knew she'd come. Merla stepped in like she always did when tension hung heavy, quiet, unannounced, and careful. She didn't sit, just leaned against the wall near the water heater, arms crossed in that subtle, "I'm here but not for long" posture. We didn't say anything for a while, just sat in the hum of old air and unsaid things. "You don't have to make a scene," she finally said. "We're trying to keep peace." Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired, as if this had been playing on a loop in her head for weeks. I didn't look up. I didn't raise my voice. "Did you know they intercepted this?" I held up the card. My name, my handwriting, Grandpa's words. She didn't ask what it was. That told me everything. Merla looked at the floor, then the wall. "Never at me. Callista's always been under a lot of pressure, you know that." I closed the card slowly, tucking it into its envelope. So the solution was to let her erase me? "It wasn't about choosing sides," she said. "Of course it was." She looked at me then, for just a breath. "We didn't want the family torn apart over misunderstandings." "No," I corrected. "You didn't want Callista to feel like she was being questioned." She didn't respond, which, frustratingly, was her favorite answer. People think silence is diplomacy. But when you let someone lie long enough and say nothing, it's consent by omission. When people fear conflict more than they value truth, they choose silence. and silence gives the liar the microphone. I didn't wait for her to leave. I stood up and walked past her into the house. In the hallway, I pulled out my phone and texted Zoe. I just needed to send it somewhere. You remember when I used to take Grandpa to his doctor visits, right? Did I ever give the lake house to Callista? Her reply came almost immediately. Zoe, are you kidding? He bought that house for you. You practically lived there. He told me you were the only one who never asked him for anything. Zoe, you didn't give it to her. She took it, and you earned that house, Ardelia. Everyone knew it. I stared at her words for a long time before printing the screenshot. I folded it neatly and tucked it into the same envelope as Grandpa's card. Enough pretending. I passed the dining room, where Callista was still laughing. She always found a way to act as if nothing ever touched her, as if she was born with a PR team in her bloodstream. They didn't look up when I walked by. I went into the guest room, formerly mine. The framed magazine covers Callista had brought over were still on the wall. I ignored them and unzipped my suitcase, pulling it onto the bed. No yelling, no storming out, no slamming doors. Just a quiet unraveling of every cord they thought still tethered me here. If they wanted me gone, they'd get their wish, but not because I gave up, because I was done being erased. I folded the last sweater into place and zipped the bag shut. Behind me I heard the sound of footsteps, slower than usual, deliberate. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Harlan stood in the doorway, his hands in his pockets like he was there by accident. He didn't speak, just watched me. I turned around and met his eyes. For once, I didn't feel small. How long, I asked, did you let her lie before you decided it wasn't your place to correct her? He opened his mouth like he might respond, but closed it again. And that silence said more than any defense ever could. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I laid there on the stiff mattress in the guest room, fully clothed, suitcase zipped and ready beside me. The envelope with Grandpa's card and Zoe's printed messages stayed under my pillow like some kind of emotional armor. By morning, the dining room had returned to normal. Half-eaten pies covered in cling wrap, chairs slightly askew, and the television buzzing with some muted morning show. The energy in the room had shifted. They thought I'd simmered down, like I always did. Smile politely, avoid conflict, slip out quietly. Not this time. I stood at the edge of the room, bag in hand. The television flickered with images of parades and marching bands, and the family gathered around as if last night hadn't happened. Callista, perfectly made up despite the hour, perched on the arm of the couch. Her tone was light, cheerful, the kind you reserve for networking events. "Oh, by the way," she chirped, gesturing toward her wine glass as if it were a mic. "When Grandpa said he gave someone the house, he probably meant me. You know how he gets us mixed up." Her laugh floated through the room like perfume, manufactured, cloying. Everyone chuckled. But the tension was thick, as if their laughter was rehearsed and hollow. I walked forward and set my bag down slowly. "Did he mix it up when he addressed the birthday card to me?" I asked, my voice calm and clear. "Or when he wrote my full name in the deed?" The room went quiet. Callista's smile cracked just slightly. Merla stood from the recliner, adjusting her sweater. "Let's not turn this into drama. It's Thanksgiving, for heaven's sake." "Drama," I said, "would be pretending not to notice you've been letting her lie to his face for over a year." No one moved. Even the television felt quieter. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a manila folder. No ceremony. Just facts. I laid the contents on the coffee table. Copies of redirected bank notices, property records, forwarding confirmations, all showing the same thing. My name, my address, all rerouted to a P.O. box registered to Callista. Callista squinted at them like they were written in another language. Maybe it was a clerical error, she offered. You know how Grandpa is with paperwork. I looked at her directly. Then why are the signature IP traces linked to your home router? She blinked. Her mouth opened slightly. No words came out. I didn't wait for more lies. I turned to Harlan. You didn't speak up when you knew the truth. That's your choice. But this? I gestured to the room, to the wine glasses, to the pretense. This isn't my family anymore. Callista scoffed under her breath. So dramatic. No wonder no one trusts you with responsibility. That line might have stung once. Now, it just revealed more about her than it did about me. I smiled, soft, small, the kind that says, I'm not here to be liked anymore. Maybe that's true, I said. But starting tomorrow, I'll be responsible for everything that was actually mine. I picked up my bag and turned toward the door. I made it 3 steps before I heard it. A voice, deep and gravelly, full of restrained thunder. Wait, you're not leaving just yet. I froze. The sound came from behind me, from the foyer, where the front door stood wide open. I turned around slowly. There he was, Grandpa Virgil, standing there in his worn overcoat, suitcase at his feet, and eyes locked straight on Callista. He wasn't smiling, and just like that, the truth walked through the door with him. He stood just inside the door, suitcase in one hand, wool coat still dusted with snow, his presence so sudden that it stopped every breath in the room. Grandpa Virgil didn't speak right away. He just looked around, scanning faces, soaking in the tension like it was thick smoke. It was Harlan who first broke the moment, half standing from his chair, voice unsure. Virgil, we thought you were coming tomorrow. Grandpa didn't answer that. He just tilted his head and asked, calm as a surgeon about to cut. Why does it feel like I walked into a crime scene? Callista's voice was honeyed and immediate. Grandpa, you're early. We weren't expecting you till tomorrow night. She rushed over with arms outstretched, but stopped short when he didn't raise his hands to meet hers. I stepped forward. I hadn't moved until then. But now, my legs moved like they belonged to someone who had finally found her ground. They've been using my name, I said, voice steady. On things I never received, including your mail. His eyes, sharp despite their years, locked on mine. Which mail? I reached into my coat, pulled out the envelope I'd been holding like a blade. I handed it to him. He opened it slowly, eyes scanning the familiar handwriting, his own. He read it once, then again. His jaw didn't clench. He didn't yell. He simply looked up and asked the question that changed the air in that room. Did she ever move into the lake house? He said. Or did someone else decide it would be more useful for their Instagram? No one spoke. Callista's face drained, but she tried anyway. She never expressed interest. I thought it was better used rather than sitting empty. Virgil turned to Merla and Harlan. Did you two know? Merla looked at her lap. We didn't want conflict. He didn't raise his voice, but it was the coldness in his tone that made me shiver. So you let your daughter be erased, he said, to protect the feelings of the liar. Then he turned fully to Callista. You told me she was living there. I sent furniture, cash, a generator during the storm. None of that reached her. Callista's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. No sound. I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. I let him take the floor because he finally saw what I'd been saying in silence for 2 years. He set his suitcase down, pulled out his briefcase, clicked it open like a man opening a vault. From inside, he removed a copy of the deed. Transferred to Ardelia Vance, he read aloud. Signed, sealed, and somehow vanished. Harlan tried to speak, raising a hand like a schoolboy asking to be excused. Virgil raised his own. I'm not looking for reasons. I'm here to correct what should never have been questioned. It wasn't anger I felt, it was release. The truth didn't need me to shout, it didn't need drama, it just needed air. The kind of air that only honesty brings. He turned to me then, closing the folder. I hope you brought a spare key. I shook my head. I didn't, but I'm ready to go back. Virgil nodded once. Then let's remind them whose name is on the deed. Grandpa and I didn't speak for the first few minutes in the car. We just sat there, the heater humming low, fogging up the windshield slightly. He tapped the side of the steering wheel like he had a rhythm only he could hear, and I stared ahead, clutching the envelope in my lap. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Zoe. Zoe, you've got to see this. Attached was a screenshot from Callista's Instagram, posted 4 months ago. Captioned, "Thankful for new beginnings. Our family retreat is finally ready." And there it was, my couch, the one with the worn armrest I'd reupholstered during a summer I couldn't afford a vacation, the antique lamp Grandpa gave me, my rug, everything I'd lovingly picked out, repainted, rearranged, reframed, just enough to pass as hers. I didn't even realize I'd said anything until Grandpa turned toward me. "She didn't just steal a deed," I said. "She stole my presence, my story, and sold it to strangers like it was hers to tell." He nodded slowly, jaw clenched. "She's going to have to return more than a couch." We pulled away from the house without saying goodbye. The road to town was mostly empty, late fall trees shedding what was left of their dignity. About 10 minutes in, Grandpa glanced sideways and asked, "Did you ever get that package I sent you during the storm?" "What package?" "Generator, blankets, groceries. I tried FaceTiming you too, but Callista picked up, said you were asleep." My grip on the phone tightened. "That was the week I didn't have power," I said. "I never heard from you." He let out a low breath. "She showed me a video of the fireplace, said you were warm and safe. She even said you were busy writing. Something about a book?" "She rerouted the calls," I muttered. "She didn't just cut me off from the house. She cut me off from you." The betrayal hit differently when it came from omission, when someone else's version of your life replaced yours entirely. "She curated a lie," I added, "and everyone believed it." Grandpa didn't speak. He just nodded, as if trying to contain something he hadn't figured out how to name yet. We pulled into a diner on the edge of town, one of those places with cracked vinyl booths and laminated menus that haven't changed since 1987. It smelled like old coffee and fried onions. For once, the comfort didn't feel cheap. We ordered nothing, just sat. He laid out the papers, copies of the property transfer, the financial logs, and a notarized letter he'd been saving. "You're not going to fight dirty," he said. "You're going to fight smart." I opened my laptop and started typing. Not a manifesto, not a confrontation, a formal letter. "To whom it may concern. Attached, you will find proof of property transfer, digital correspondence, and evidence of misrepresentation regarding—" I didn't need to rant. I needed documentation. Let her keep spinning her story online. I'd bring facts. Tangible, time-stamped, legally binding truth. That evening, sitting at the desk in my childhood room, I attached everything: the screenshot, the deed, the statement, the notarized page with Grandpa's seal. And I wrote, "This is the truth. From here, I act accordingly." I didn't wait for a response. I already knew the silence would be the loudest answer. The next morning, brunch was set like it was any other holiday. The table gleamed with freshly polished silverware, and the kitchen buzzed with low conversation and the clatter of serving spoons against ceramic. Merla moved about in her usual efficient way, stacking fruit into a glass bowl like arranging peace on top of chaos. No one mentioned the night before. No one dared. They thought I'd keep quiet, too. But this wasn't a return to routine. It was the final act. Grandpa stood near the fireplace, nursing his coffee with both hands like it was a habit that anchored him. His eyes scanned the room while no one looked back. Then, without raising his voice, he said, "Ardelia, I meant to ask last night, but things got tense. Did you like the house I gave you?" It was as if a fuse had been lit. Forks stopped midair. Chairs creaked from stiffened postures. Someone coughed to cover the silence, but the damage was done. I didn't hesitate. I stood slowly, placed my napkin beside my untouched plate, and looked straight at Callista. "No, Grandpa," I said. "I wouldn't know what it's like to like something I never received." The words hung in the air like smoke. Callista's jaw tensed. Her hand crushed her napkin like it was the only thing she could still control. Merla leaned forward, voice low and sharp. "Virgil, not here." Grandpa didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and walked to the head of the table. He laid the document down in front of Harlan. "Here's the wire transfer, the deed, the delivery receipts," he said. "All sent to Ardelia, all redirected to someone else's address." Callista stood halfway. "I thought she said she didn't want it. I was protecting her from property taxes. I figured it'd overwhelm her." "Funny," I said, reaching into my coat, "because I didn't say anything of the sort." I placed my phone on the table and pressed play. "Hey, Callista, thanks again for taking care of that real estate paperwork. You're a lifesaver." It was Merla's voice, casual, complicit. A voicemail from months ago, when I'd first started noticing documents missing, communication oddly stilted. Nobody said a word, but I felt the silence turn. Not the kind you use to avoid conflict, but the kind that confirms it. The kind that makes cowards out of those who've already chosen a side. Grandpa looked at everyone like a man who'd seen just enough. "I'm meeting with my lawyer Monday," he said. "Everything Callista received under false identity will be retracted legally. Every signature, every dollar, every lie." Callista shoved her chair back. "You're siding with her?" "I'm siding with the truth," he replied. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and stormed out. Merla, ever the silent shadow, followed her. The rest of the table stayed seated. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at their plates like they held some secret answer. I reached for my coffee and took a sip. It tasted stronger than usual, but I didn't mind. For the first time, the bitterness matched the moment. I didn't smile for show. I smiled for myself. Quiet, still, real. Because vindication doesn't need applause, just acknowledgement. And I had it. As the room tried to recover, a voice came from the hallway. "There's one more thing she forged." I turned, startled. Jenna, my cousin, stood there holding an envelope in both hands. "I didn't know who to trust back then," she said, walking forward. "But I kept this." And suddenly, what I thought was the final blow was only the beginning. Jenna didn't say anything as we walked to her car. She just gestured with a tilt of her head and opened the passenger door like we'd done this 100 times before. It wasn't until she reached across the center console and popped open the glove compartment that she finally spoke. "I didn't know what to do with this," she said. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a notarized delivery confirmation addressed to me. My name spelled correctly. My address. But the signature at the bottom? Callista's. "She signed for it?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "I saw her," Jenna admitted. "She said she had power of attorney. Said it was all being handled for you because you were too busy or something. But it didn't feel right." I closed my eyes for a moment. Another lie. Another layer. But this time, someone else had seen it happen. We got into the car. Jenna offered to drive us out to the lake house, and I didn't protest. I needed someone with me, not for safety, but as a witness. Someone who could see what I'd been forced to feel alone for too long. The ride was quiet, the kind of silence that filled in the spaces between shock and action. The pine trees blurred past, familiar and sharp, the gravel road narrowing as we approached the property. When we arrived, the mailbox was overflowing. Jenna got out first and pointed toward a cluster of boxes stacked on the porch. "I don't think anyone's picked up mail in days," she said. I approached slowly. A few packages still had winter stickers on them, delivered months ago. Some bore my name, sealed, never opened. I knocked on the door, expecting no answer. Callista's husband answered instead. He looked surprised to see me. "She's not here," he said before I even asked. "She left 2 days ago, took her things and said not to expect her back." I didn't ask where she went. I didn't care. I asked to enter the house. He stepped aside without a word. Inside, everything looked curated, like a showroom designed to look lived in. It was cold, despite the sunlight spilling in through the bay window. A familiar chill, the kind that mimicked hospitality while withholding warmth. On the hallway table sat a guest book, the kind you'd see at a boutique rental. I flipped it open, page after page of entries thanking Callista for the stay, complimenting the decor, mentioning a kind host. Then I saw my name, written in cursive, my cursive, but not by me. The slant was too rigid, the loops too small. It looked like a mimicry of me by someone who had only glanced at my handwriting, not studied it. A performance, not an impression. I pulled out the birthday card from Grandpa, my real handwriting, and held it next to the forged one. There was no mistaking it. One was mine, the other was manufactured. She didn't just take the house, she took me, my name, my voice, my presence. She built a version of me that was more convenient for her narrative, and then sold that version to the world. Later that night, back at the lake house, I was sorting through the mail when my phone rang. Dad. I answered without saying hello. His voice was low, rough, like gravel under tires. "I knew about the deed," he said. "I didn't know all of it, but I knew enough." I waited. Let the silence do its job. "I thought silence would keep the family together," he added. But all it did was break the one part worth keeping. It wasn't an apology, but it was something, a crack in the wall he'd helped build. "I hope your silence was worth the price," I said, and hung up before he could answer. I didn't need anything else from him. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Grandpa. "Lawyer says the court date's set. Want to be there when it happens?" I stared at it for a long time before typing my reply. I wouldn't miss it, because some people face justice in court, others face it when they wake up alone. Thanksgiving Day was supposed to be when Grandpa Virgil arrived. That had always been the plan. His chair, his place card, even the little bottle of sugar-free syrup for his coffee. Every year, the same. But he didn't walk through the door until hours after the fallout. Turns out, a meeting with his lawyer ran late. He hadn't told anyone about it, not even me. In his briefcase, tucked between stacks of organized documents and lined notepads, was something I never expected, an updated deed. Property reassigned, reaffirmed, notarized and sealed with my name, Ardelia Vance. No confusion, no dispute. "I had a feeling," he told me later, his voice low as we sat on the porch. Callista's emails sounded rehearsed, like she was always speaking on behalf of someone else. I stared at the mug in my hand, steam curling into the late autumn air. He suspected, I thought, but he gave them the benefit of the doubt. I did the same. We were both wrong, but his delay, what felt like an absence in the moment, had landed like fate's hammer, just in time to see the truth unravel, one lie at a time. The court date came faster than I thought it would. Callista showed up late. No lawyer. Just a folder and her usual armor of arrogance. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She tried to say, I misunderstood, that Grandpa was old, that it was all a miscommunication. But when the judge asked for evidence, proof of transfer, consent, communication, she had none. What she did have was a voicemail played in open court, her voice promising to handle it all quietly. Merla's message, thanking her for taking care of all those boring documents Ardelia doesn't want to deal with. The judge didn't raise his voice. He just nodded, stamped the paperwork, and said, all assets to be restored to Ms. Vance immediately. That was it. Years of confusion, gaslighting, silence, unraveled in 10 minutes. I didn't look at Callista as I left the courtroom. I didn't have to. Her social media, once filled with curated smiles and manufactured warmth, went dark. Her consulting clients started disappearing. Posts vanished. Comments got turned off. And just like that, the image she'd worked so hard to maintain collapsed under the weight of truth. But I didn't feel triumphant. Not in the way people imagine. Justice isn't revenge. It's clarity with consequence. I moved into the lake house 3 days later. It was quiet, still, undisturbed in a way I hadn't known I needed. I replaced broken porch rails, cleaned out closets, donated what wasn't mine. The house started to breathe again, and so did I. I bought a new journal, labeled the first page, Aftermath. I didn't fill it with bitterness. I wrote letters, to myself, to the girl who once apologized for asking questions, to the version of me that let others decide how small I needed to be. I kept those letters in a drawer. Unsent, unread by anyone but me. Grandpa visits every Sunday. We sit on the back porch, sometimes in silence, sometimes arguing about crossword puzzles. We never talk about Thanksgiving. We talk about tomatoes, neighborhood dogs, and how cold the water must be this time of year. I told him I'd be teaching again, just part-time. The local community center needed someone for their adult literacy program. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like mine. I didn't win because I fought. I won because I stopped shrinking. Late one evening, just as the last light faded from the lake, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a photo, old, sun-worn, with faded corners. Me, Grandpa, and Callista sitting on a porch swing. My legs dangled off the edge, no shoes, jelly stains on my shirt. Her arm draped over my shoulder like we were born fused together. On the back, scrawled in ink, we weren't always enemies. There was no signature. Just a second folded note. Do you believe people can change? I held it for a long time, unsure if the question needed an answer. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't know how to answer. The days were quiet now. Weeks had passed since the courtroom, since the gavel hit wood and Callista's face sank under the weight of her own lies. Since then, I'd barely seen anyone outside of the volunteer circle at the community center. Even the neighbors at the lake house gave me a different kind of wave now. Longer, more certain, like they finally saw me for who I really was. But no one from my family called, not to say sorry, not to say anything. A few texts trickled in from cousins, messages that danced around the truth like it was still too hot to hold. Hope you're well. Glad you've got the house now. You deserve peace. Let's catch up sometime soon. They were placeholders, not reparations. And I didn't respond. I kept busy. I taught reading 3 afternoons a week. I planted lavender in the back garden. I took long walks with Grandpa, who insisted on carrying a cane he didn't actually need. Every Sunday, he brought me a bag of groceries and never mentioned the case. He talked about soup recipes and which birds he'd spotted from the window. It was a rhythm I hadn't realized I needed. But there was one thing I hadn't stopped thinking about. The moment I could have filed charges against Merla, my own mother, I had the right. My lawyer had made that very clear. "We can include her in the fraud claim," she'd said, her pen hovering over a fresh intake form. "You'd win." But I said no. I told myself I still hoped she'd reach out, that maybe she'd knock on my door one morning. No makeup, no excuses, just truth. That moment never came. Instead, what I got was an apology-shaped silence, the kind that hoped I'd forget or forgive without asking. I remembered what my lawyer asked me that day. "Do you want justice or restoration?" I whispered, "I just want the lying to stop." And it had, but not because anyone confessed. It stopped because I finally stopped waiting for them to do the right thing. One evening, I sat at the old desk by the window and wrote a letter. I didn't plan to send it, I just needed to write it. "Callista, you didn't just steal from me. You made me feel like I was never enough to keep. You crafted a version of me that fit your narrative better than I ever did in person. And the worst part? You almost convinced me that version was true." I folded it neatly and slid it into the drawer I'd labeled Unsent Truths. There were 7 letters in there now. One to Mom, one to Dad, one to myself from 3 years ago. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt honest. Forgiveness doesn't always mean they get to hear it. I whispered to no one. That night, as I washed my mug and turned off the porch light, my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I didn't recognize it at first, but the message made my stomach clench. "I know I don't deserve to ask, but I'd like to see you, alone, please." Below it, a name I hadn't read since court, Callista. I stood there for a while, phone still in hand, dish towel forgotten on the counter, and just like that, the silence I had built my world around began to crack. I chose the cafe, neutral ground, bright windows, a place too public for raised voices or unfinished threats. Missoula's downtown had a way of pretending everything was okay, even when you were sitting across from someone who'd torn your life apart. She arrived 5 minutes late. Callista wore sunglasses inside, even though it was cloudy. Her posture was stiff. Her voice, when she greeted me, was smaller than I remembered. "I didn't expect to lose everything," she said. "No hello, no how are you, just that. I thought I could fix it before it went too far," she added. I nodded but said nothing. I wasn't here for her performance. I wasn't here for a redemption arc. I was here for the ending, the real one. "I'm sorry," she said, pulling off the glasses. Her eyes were puffy, the kind of swollen you can't contour away. Not for what happened, but for what it cost. "You're sorry you lost," I said quietly. "That's different." She looked down. I held my coffee cup with both hands, steady and still. I didn't flinch. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not yell, but not let them rewrite the story either. She tried again. "Mom and Dad were the ones who let it happen. You know how they always saw you." I cut her off. "I'm not here to relive your excuses. I'm here to tell you this is the last time we speak." I reached into my bag and slid a manila envelope across the table. She stared at it like it was radioactive. "It's a permanent cease and desist," I said. "Full transfer of all residual claims, restitution clause. You'll get the breakdown from my attorney." "Signed, filed, final." She went pale. You're really cutting me out? I nodded once. No, I'm cutting myself free. We didn't shake hands. We didn't hug. We just sat there, letting the weight of finality settle like dust between us. Later that afternoon, I was back at the lake house. The wind had picked up a bit, sending fallen pine needles skating across the driveway. I dug my hands into the soil behind the porch, planting the first rose bush I'd bought for the garden I'd never had the time or space to grow. Grandpa pulled up just as I was watering the roots. He stepped out of the car with a small wooden plaque in hand. "For your mailbox," he said. "Figured it was time your name lived where it belonged." I turned it over in my hands, carved in neat serif letters, Ardelia Vance. We sat on the porch drinking coffee, not saying much. He watched the trees. I watched the sun crawl its way toward the lake. "You did more than win," he said eventually. "You outlived the lie." I smiled, not with my mouth, but with my bones, because I knew what he meant, and I knew it was true. "I didn't get the family I wanted," I said finally, "but I became the woman I needed to be." That night, I built a fire in the old stone fireplace. It crackled warmly, spitting sparks like little bursts of punctuation. I opened the drawer labeled Unsent Truths. One by one, I pulled out the letters. The one to Mom, the one to Dad, the one to the version of myself who stayed too long in rooms where I wasn't welcome. And finally, the note Callista had left with the photograph. I fed them into the fire, watched the flames curl the edges, turn years of silence and second-guessing into smoke. When the last paper turned to ash, I whispered to the flames, "This time, the story ends with me." I walked to the front door, turned the lock, and for the first time, it was locked from the inside, not to keep anyone out, but to keep me in, safe, whole, unapologetically mine.